Hello everybody, I am now getting ready to keg my beers. So right now I've got my glycol chiller set to around -3, -4, and it's already cycled off right now. And right now my temperature of my beer is 39.7, and I have the glycol chiller pump running right now. It is down inside here, and it'll in the next hour bring this down, this 10 gallons of beer down to about 36, and then I'm going to keg it, and I will record kegging it. Now the one thing I have done is I've pressurized fermented. Fermenter pressurization is what I can do with this spike conical fermenter. You can see that there. It's at about 8 psi right now. It blows off at 15. So the majority of this has been at 15 psi. I did drop it down to about 50 psi, and then I dropped the pressure down and added dry hops for about 3 or 4 days. And now I've let the pressure did come back up to 15 because the hops do cause the breakdown of the sugars again, which wakes up the yeast again, and it will re-ferment. And you gotta let it sit for about 3 or 4 days, or you're going to get what's called hop creep. So once I put the hops in, I brought the temperature back up to 72 for 4 days, then I cold crashed it. And that's what I'm doing now. It's been cold crashing for about a day to 2 days to help clarify it. And then once I do that, I will be putting into the kegs, and I'll show you that next. Okay guys, so what I've done here now is set up this tube here off my CO2 container, and I've hooked it up to the basically the spot where I'm going to drain my beer through from the bottom. There's like a pickup tube that's pointed to the basically to the side here, and under here I've got a filter, and I bought this online for like 20 bucks, that filter, and it's basically a filter for I guess sediment for water, but it has, I think it's 100 microns, and I'm using it as a hop filter. Because what happens is you're gonna get hop sediment in here, because I did dry hop this, and it will get filtered out, most of it will here. So when it goes into my kegs right here, you don't get sediment in the bottom, like a lot of it, which plugs up basically the outlets here, and you constantly have to keep cleaning them out, and I don't want that. So I don't want any sediment basically in the bottom of these kegs. So those are 2 5-gallon kegs. I've already sanitized them, and they've been pressurized with CO2 just to push out most of the air, because air is lighter than CO2. CO2 is heavier. So the CO2 right now in these is probably sitting half full of CO2 at the bottom. The other top half will be air. And as the beer flows from the bottom, it's going to push out the push up the CO2, and the air will go out. And the reason you're doing that is you do not want oxidation on your finished beer. When you are fermenting beer, you want lots and lots of oxygen in the wort, so that basically the yeast has something to be able to live with, because it's like us, it breathes oxygen and it breathes out CO2 just like us. So when the beer's finished, you do not want any oxygen in here, because it will not be taken up by any of the yeast, because we're going to pretty much have no yeast left in the beer pouring in here. So you're gonna have beer oxidation, and we do not want that at all. So what I'm gonna do now is, I don't know if I told you, but I did purge CO2 pressure through this line, and I have purged all of this area of air, so that there is no air in the bottom of this. That is CO2, and that's also so I don't have oxidation. And so the next thing I'll do is I'm going to put the tube right here and put it into one of the kegs. So I'm just gonna stop filming, because I only got 2 hands holding here, and I'll show you what I'm gonna do next. Okay, so now I've got the beer is flowing through the filter here, and it is pouring into the bottom of the keg. And this is trickier than I was thinking, because I forgot that because this has been under pressure, it is partially carbonated. I'm hoping I don't get too much of a head. This is a little trickier than I was thinking of it being. I have before in the past done it under pressure. Maybe I'm thinking I probably should have. I might stop this and do that now. So so now I'm on the second keg, and it's just cranking up here. Got about 90 ounces coming up. You can see the filter's working really good. The top filter that I paid like 20 bucks for on Amazon, because if you go and you buy, I think they're called Bouncer, and they're like expensive. They're $100-something. I mean, I did have to actually buy it, not just the filter itself, but these two connectors at the ends there. They're 1.5-inch tri-clamps. They were, I think, 10 bucks each. So it's probably about $40 that I spent on that, but it was 100 and something for the other one. And this, it works fine. I mean, if you had a lot of hops in there, I have had that happen before, where there's so many hops that it plugs up and I have to stop and clean it out 2 or 3 times, and it was plugged solid. So it does work. It works really well. And what I do too is I watch, see how this is stopped now at 93.6 ounces, because it's now equalized with the pressure in the tank versus the pressure I have up here. When I want to increase the pressure up top into this tank here, let's open up my CO2, bleed that in a bit, and that will start to increase more beer going in, but I also have to pull off this and bleed off some of the pressure that's also building up in the head. Sorry, I ended up stopping the video. I was just saying, as I bled pressure off here, it now increases how fast it's going in. And you can also see in this one, the sweat showing up, which is great. The other one, I went right up until I got to the very top line here, which is 5 gallons. Normally what happens when I do I try to do a 10-gallon batch, I never get a full 2 kegs out. Once in a while I do, but it's because this cone here, there's a lot of sediment in here that you don't want to pick up and have in your beer. So you lose probably a gallon or so of sediment at the bottom. Also, it's yeast. And if you want, with this type of fermenter, which is great, is you can collect the yeast down here and you can reuse it for your next brew. Some people just dump it right back into the next brew, or they will do what's called washing, the yeast wash, where it's basically you put the yeast into a water that's been boiled and cooled off, and you allow the yeast to settle up top, and then the rest pour off, and yet, or is it the other way around? I can't remember now. And you want to get the yeast away from any of the sediment. But you know what? This was like USO4 that I used, and a packet of USO4 is like $4. I used 2 packets for the 10 gallons, $8, no big deal. But the one thing you have to know about using yeast that you collect is then you have to make sure when you put your wort into this container with your reused yeast or your saved yeast, it's actually, you do get supposed to be better the second or third or fourth time you use the yeast, but you then have to oxygenate this, because the dried yeast you get in those packets, the yeast has already gone through I'm trying to remember the name of it, but basically it doesn't have to be aerated, so you can just drop the yeast straight into there dry, and you don't have to aerate the any of the wort that's in the fermenter. But when you're reusing the yeast, you do. And so you're either gonna have to shake this thing around to try and aerate it, or I have an air stone that I connect up to oxygen, which then you get into buying oxygen, and it's a bit of a pain in the butt. But yeah, I'm just gonna keep on filling these kegs up bit by bit. Okay, dudes, guys, girls, that's it. So I've kegged 10 gallons of beer. I actually got it right up, see, it's right up to the top. Perfect. That's one thing I do like about it's called a dip tube. You see how there's this bar here? So what I'm able to do is the tube actually, it turns inside, so you can move it up or down. And so normally you'll have it up a little higher, pointing up a little bit, and then when the beer starts to show bubbles coming through, you can then drop that down until you find the point where you start to see more sediment starting to fill into your filter there, and then you stop. So it means that I've got maybe, probably 4 or 5 inches of liquid that's left in the bottom here, but that's going to be mixed with sediment, and it's not a big deal. So I got 10 full gallons out of these into these 2 kegs. So the next thing I'm going to do is I put them in my fridge, and I pressurize them with CO2 the whole tank itself to about 30 psi for a day or two. They're already partially carbonated, so maybe for a day I'll put them at 30 psi, and that'll help absorb and soak in more CO2 into the keg. And I look to have a volume about 3.0 volumes of CO2, which is a measurement of how much it's carbonated. So usually 2.2 to 3.6 is normal range. I like it more fizzy, so I usually go about 3.0. Gives it a little more of a bitey mouthfeel that I like with my IPAs. So guys, thanks for watching. Please subscribe if you haven't. I'll do more videos as I go. I'm gonna do a tasting on this one. I'm not gonna hold my, or I'm gonna cross my fingers because it's the first brew I've done in a year, and I actually made a mistake with which grain to use. I screwed right up. I ended up using, I thought I was putting 10 pounds of pale malt and a couple pounds of, 20 pounds of pale malt, 2 pounds of two-row. I did the reverse, so it won't be as light a beer, but it should work out okay. Any questions you guys have on any of the things that I've used today, or any other questions at all, just let me know, guys. I'm going to clean up now, which is going to take me probably about an hour or so to do all that, and I won't bore you with those details. So have a great one, guys. Cheers.